Christian Bond. I work for Anasazi. I've worked with them over the years on and off, but worked with them total probably about 3 years. I started off there. Well, I mean, everyone starts off as a trail walker. That's just like the basic, working with the kids every day. And I did that for a year and a half. Then I took off, did some other stuff for a little bit, and they called me up a couple years later and asked if I wanted to come back and do ridge walk, which is kind of more of a I don't want to say supervisory, but it's more like backup. And so I would help out if they had emergencies, and they would check in a couple times a day to make sure that they were getting what they needed and the kids were getting what they needed. And so they called me a couple years later to do that, and I did that for another year and a half. And I kind of help out here and now whenever they need it now.
How did you come to find Anasazi?
Well, everyone comes to Anasazi for a reason, I feel. And so I started taking classes from David Wescott at the university I went to. And my first class I took from him, he started talking about like some of the primitive skills. It wasn't even a primitive skills class; it was a different class. And but I was real interested in what they did, so I started taking his primitive skills classes. And I knew that he was somehow tied in with Anasazi, but I wasn't sure how at the time. And then some of my friends that were in the same classes with me, they went down to Anasazi and they came back and they told me about the great time that they had. And they're like, "Oh, you gotta do it. You would love it." And so then I was talking with Dave Wescott because I wanted to really work on my survival skills or primitive skills, and make sure I had things like friction fire down. And he's like, "Well, that'd be a great place to go." And so I was like, "Well, I'll just head down there and see what happens." And I struggled my first couple weeks out there. I think everyone does. And then I just grew to love it, and it was just invigorating every week out there. And it was almost like I almost want something crazy to happen, because you just like I just felt so invigorated by it because you were so like tested in the wilderness. And yeah.
What was that struggle? Because I think you're right, and I've heard that from several people. Is that first couple of weeks was a real struggle. What do you think the benefits of that struggle are?
Well, benefits. I mean, I think the struggle's there so you don't give up, or so that you have to like have the opportunity to give up and choose not to. And then, what did you say? Ask the benefits of that struggle, or
Yeah. What are the?
oh, and then you struggle, and then I think that one of the things it does that's great for the program is that you struggle, and then you're like, oh, these are what these kids are going through, and they're struggling too all the time. And usually when you're new, like the kids have been there a couple weeks, so you're the one struggling. They actually have got it down at this point. But when the new kids come in, I think it's important that you remember that, because I mean, we'll have kids that come in, they've never spent a night out under the stars. And for me, I'm asleep, I hear a twig break, I'm just going to sleep right through it. But they hear a twig break, or they hear a rustle, or even when they rustle and they're not used to the sound of them own rustling, it scares them to death. And so to remember that and remember the struggle that you went through for growing out there can really help you help them learn what they need to and feel comfortable.
Can you remember something that was a challenge for you in that first couple of weeks?
Man, so the Anasazi, we don't have like factory or made packs. We just make them with a tarp and with some string and some. We've got a burrito. We call it a burrito, but it's really a bivy sack that's like from World War II or whatever. And we use those for our straps. And man, there's no way to make that thing comfortable your first week, and probably ever. I mean, they get more comfortable, and you realize the utility because everything you have has a double purpose. But and that thing just like, and you've got all your food in there, plus you've got these extra, medical equipment and communications equipment that seem to weigh a ton, and there's no way to make that thing comfortable. So you're just lugging all this weight. And at Anasazi, we very rarely, or try never, to walk on trails or roads. So it's just through whatever you're going through. And I'd been hiking my whole life, but when you get down to Arizona, like there's sometimes just no easy way to get anywhere. And So walking through, like, you're like getting on your knees to crawl under the trees or whatever if you're down by the creek, or you're walking way out of your way around this prickly pear forest. It just it's just hard work. And then on top of that, you're with young walkers, and that's what we call our clients, that are having all these same struggles, but they haven't had a lifetime like I had when I came in of being active in the wilderness. So they're tired and they can't walk at the same speed that we can. So you're walking much slower to help accommodate them, and I think that that's difficult, more difficult than hiking fast sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, when I was walking through the Anasazi course area, the thought that came to mind was no good route.
That's it. That's totally it. And where you were at on the Verde, I mean, unless you're willing to get wet probably about every 15 minutes, crossing it, there is nothing
That was rough
to do over there.
It was rough. So earlier we were talking a little bit about why primitive skills seem to work with people. Can you share a little bit about what you were saying?
Yeah. Well, like I was telling you earlier, that like, there's no people on the planet that at some point weren't doing primitive skills. Like every, like you look, like my ancestry goes back to like Scandinavian countries and England and stuff. But we were making fire. We were doing a little bit different than people probably down here were. But we were all making at some point like some style of friction fire. Even the fire pistons that they're doing over there, the friction is the air, but it's friction fire still. And so like it's in our blood, it's in our DNA, these things that we used to do. And the other thing I think is about primitive skills is that we've got the ancestry to it, but there comes this really great feeling when you realize that you just look around, like wherever we are in the desert, and you're like, oh, I can use that to make this thing that I need, and I can use that to make this thing that I need. And I don't have very much, especially Anasazi. We fairly primitive. We have knives and cups and water bottles and stuff. But with just those few small tools, we make a lot of the rest of the other tools that we need. And but you're on the land, and then you're using the land to keep you alive, essentially. And I just think that's wise, because we all we're all on Mother Earth. A lot of us don't know how to use any of this stuff anymore, but just because we don't know how to use it it's still there to take care of us.
So what happens? What do you notice happens to a young walker when they start to recognize that, start to notice that everything they need is here?
Well, that's what everything that happens is they get out here, they start realizing they don't need their cell phone, they don't need their car. That a lot of their friends that they thought that were so important to them, their friends weren't helping them do anything really good. And so then their confidence, one thing, goes up. At Anasazi, one of the very first things we teach them, and even before they can start the official program, is to make fire. And of course, some kids struggle with it, some kids get it right away. But we've noticed that the kids that struggle with fire and don't get it for the first few weeks or whatever, that we have to take a very special effort, because their confidence will be considerably less than the people that were able to get fire. And then they'll get that first fire that they've worked so hard for. And believe me, it took me 4 years to bust my first friction fire. I started in my backyard with like a 2x4.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, look, no matter how hard it's been for you, like it's been harder for me. But but as soon as they get that first fire, there's an immediate change to their confidence of who they are and their skills out there. And so we make sure to make a big deal out of it, because it is a big deal. You think about how many people are able to just take things that they find by walking through and light a fire. That's ancient technology that not very many people know, and that they do at that point.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned sharing, long-term struggle, failure, maybe,
Yeah.
and Why would you do that with a student, with a young walker?
Uh, help with the fire and stuff.
Well, yeah, to share your experience there.
Oh, no, my experience. Oh well, I mean, if you tell them at first, they're it doesn't mean anything to them, because they don't know how hard it is, and so you let them try for a little bit, and then when they're starting to struggle, then you can share that with them, and it helps them realize that like you haven't always just been like this like person that feels comfortable in the woods. When the kids come in, there's a tendency to be, because the staff, we've been doing it for a few months or however long. We know how to be comfortable out there. And they don't, and then sometimes they'll kind of be like, oh, you know how to do everything. It's never been hard for you. And then to share with them like, well, actually, it was really hard for me, and you probably won't struggle as much as I did. And then they can start to see like, oh yeah, you're a human too, just like me, and you've had problems and struggles in your life. And then in Anasazi, we love to talk to people as like the skills. We use the skills to teach a principle, and when they start to see me as a person, yeah, and so I'm teaching them fire and then showing them like, oh yeah, I struggled with fire, but there's some things that I learned that helped, and then hopefully we can get to the point where, like, I've struggled also in my life, and here's some things that help me that might be able to help you as well, and we have the Anasazi Way and the Seven Paths books and things that help us with that as well. I mean, one of the things that I've realized at working for Anasazi, and I can't imagine it's too much different for the other programs, is that like you're working with kids and you're helping them do like get their life around or whatever they need to do. Sometimes it's just find confidence or get off a substance, whatever it is. But while you're doing that, you can't help but also like kind of get the help that you need as well. No person that's out there doesn't have a struggle. We all have struggles. And then by going out and by helping these kids that are having their struggles, they're more pronounced. You would be lying to pretend that you didn't have those. But being able to be there with them while they're struggling and share with you the struggles that you've had, you also grow. And I know that I changed and became, I think, a better person, Anasazi, probably more than any of the kids that I walked with. But that was my path for me, and that's one of the most valuable things from it was how I was able to grow while I was helping these kids, and that's one of the most beautiful things about wilderness therapy is that you have the kids that are growing a lot, and you've got the staff that are growing and sharing, and then hopefully we're all going out into the world to show the things that we've learned to like help the world, right?
Yeah.
My generation, we want to save the world, but I'd way rather just like help a small portion of it, because that's how we'll really do it.
Hmm. You mentioned earlier talking about some of the people that were mentors to you. Could you just talk a little bit about some of those and what you learned from them?
Yeah. So, like I said, Dave Wescott, he's definitely the first, and Dave Wescott always makes a big deal about knowing your like genealogy for the skills. And so I can have a picture of myself with Dave Wescott and with Larry Olson because that's kind of like my lineage of learning primitive skills. It's kind of a funny aside, but I think he's got a point. Like we do need to remember like our roots there. So Dave Wescott was definitely one of my first mentors with getting me into it and getting me excited about it. When I came down to Anasazi, one of the first days, probably my first day down here, I met Ezekiel Sanchez, and you're not going to meet anyone that's come through Anasazi that hasn't been benefited by knowing him and learned from him because he's an incredible human being in this, especially in this field, for mentoring people and using those primitive skills to help change lives. And then while I was on the field, there was a ton of people that were super helpful to me. One was Sheldon Nelson, Matt Stanger. He was, I was telling you about how came back and did Ridge. He was my Ridge for the first while I was here, and he'd walked the trail for about 10 years, so I mean way longer than I ever did. And he just had craziest insights. But what I learned from him, though, well, yeah, for Anasazi was like way of being. You'd see him go into a really stressful situation, start making jokes. Pretty soon, everyone's laughing, and situations averted itself just from his like way of being. So he was a big mentor that way. I think I think that was I've gained most from Ezekiel, or that he's taught me, was like is like to just to like pick a point and then just like go for it. And that's what he did. He's like, I found out this way is going to help kids, and that's the way I'm going to be on this path of like helping people for the rest of my life, and I'm going to help everyone that I can. And so there are so many times where I'd be walking by his office, and I'd wave or whatever, and he'd be like, "Christian, come on in. How was your week this week?" And he would always take time. I mean, when he had time, but he'd always take time to sit with anybody. And I remember one time we had a kid that ran from the program and made it quite a ways, and the guy that went out there and got him was Ezekiel. He's older at that point, and it's not easy for him to go out there. But when he was talking to the kid, he drove him all the way back to the field. We picked him up out there, and the guy was picked a point, like helping people, and he made sure he did that for the rest of his life. And he's helped thousands of people.
Thanks for watching. Please like this video and subscribe. The Primitivus Project is made possible by the generous sponsorship of Wingate Wilderness Therapy. To learn more, visit wingatewilderness.therapy.com.